This episode of Rhizome is brought to you in part by the Synthesis Security Group and Fuzzy Wuzzy Signal Processing, a venture of Ian Swanke. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved.
Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we are diving straight into the great I before E spelling myth. We're tackling what is arguably one of the most famous and, spoiler alert, notoriously unreliable rules in the entire English language. If you've ever found yourself agonizing over a spelling word, well, you're definitely going to want to stick around for this. I before E, except after C. I mean, we all know this nostalgic little rhyme, right? We learned it way back in elementary school, and we completely trusted it to guide us through those weekly spelling tests. For years, it was practically handed to us as the absolute golden rule of spelling, like this foolproof algorithm for decoding English. But here's the harsh linguistic reality. This so-called rule, it is actually a massive lie. It's the ultimate linguistic trick, because as we're about to see, the second a rule has more exceptions than it has actual followers, it absolutely stops being a rule. It just becomes this loose, kind of baffling suggestion that somehow wormed its way into our classrooms and just stuck there for decades. So let's look at our first rule breaker, E before I. Let's see how this whole algorithm just completely falls apart right out of the gate. Just look at this overwhelming list of everyday words. They rebelliously slap that E right in the front, and there is absolutely zero C nearby. I mean, we're talking about incredibly common words here. Weird, seize, leisure, protein, foreign. And then you've got forfeit, height, air, there, sovereign. This literally proves we aren't just looking at one or two bizarre outliers. These are words we use every single day that completely shatter the basic premise of the rhyme. Moving on to our next section, the extended rhyme fails. Now, die-hard defenders of this rule will always eagerly point to its famous extension, saying, or when sounded as A, as in neighbor and way, you know the one. This extended jingle is a pretty clever attempt to save the original rule by accounting for one very specific vowel sound. And hey, to be totally fair, this addendum actually does successfully cover words like vein, beige, skein, and feign. It gives us a neat, tidy little box to put them in. But while it tries to act like this ultimate catch-all, it actually creates a massive blind spot. Because the absolutely crucial point here is that this extension is not a true phonetic rule at all. It's really just an escape hatch. It's a patch fix for a fundamentally broken spelling algorithm, and it completely fails to solve the underlying problem with the core rule itself. This right here perfectly illustrates that exact problem. Sure, words like neighbor and way are saved by the A sound rule, but look at the other side. The rhyme completely abandons words with a long I sound, like height and slight, and it totally ignores short I sounds too, like in forfeit and foreign. The so-called escape hatch only works if you just conveniently ignore dozens of common words that sound completely different. Okay, let's jump into our third category, rule breaker, after the C. Now, this category of failure is particularly devastating because it completely shatters the very core of the except after C mandate. Listen to these. Science, glacier, ancient, efficient, conscience, society. These are super familiar words, and they boldly ignore the primary directive. They confidently place an I before an E, directly after a C. So much for exceptions, right? To really grasp why this happens, we have to talk about what's called a phonetic shift. This concept exposes how that little elementary school rhyme completely ignores the basic mechanics of syllables and word roots. You see, sometimes letters team up to create a totally different sound altogether, or the vowels simply belong to completely separate parts of the word. Think about the expectation versus the reality. The rhyme assumes that IE or EI are always going to perfectly blend into one single vowel sound. But the reality? English constantly refuses to do this. A lot of times, the C teams up with the I to make a completely different sh sound, like in glacier or ancient. Or other times, the I and E split off into entirely separate syllables, like in science or society. Actually, scratch that whole rule. A simple rhyme is just no match for how complex our language really is.
Which brings us to our next point, 3,700 statistical exceptions.
Seriously, if you aren't thoroughly convinced yet that this rule is entirely defunct, we just need to look at the hard, undeniable data across the entire English lexicon. A deep statistical analysis of the dictionary revealed a truly staggering number, over 3,700.
Let me put that into perspective for you. That is the exact number of words that feature an EI spelling without a C anywhere in sight. 3,700. This massive list completely eclipses the number of words that actually follow the classic rule. Think about that for a second. When a rule has over 3,700 exceptions that drastically outnumber the followers, well, it ceases to be a rule at all. It's barely even a coincidence. It is practically a statistical anomaly at this point.
All right, let's wrap this up with our final section. A very weird system. Let's bring this all back to the ultimate rule breaker word, one that perfectly summarizes this entire explainer. You probably saw it earlier on our list, but it turns out the word weird really is the perfect word here. Not just because it blatantly breaks the I before E rule, but because it flawlessly describes the beautifully chaotic nature of the English spelling system itself. Our language is just this massive, messy blend of different historical influences, and trying to force all of that into a neat little rhyme is, well, it's just plain weird. So, I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to ponder today. If the exceptions literally eclipse the rule itself, isn't it finally time we drop this linguistic trick from our classrooms forever? Maybe we need to stop looking for perfect rules and just embrace the glorious chaos of our language. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep questioning those rules.
Now available exclusively on Amazon Kindle eBooks, Rhizome Summer 2026, a collection of essays, Rhizome Fall 2026 Book 2.